This sitting is resumed. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to join this debate to continue the serious, mature approach that was taken by he who led in this debate, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South. And I say that not because he sits next to me, and so is my neighbor in this honorable chamber, but I say so because it was clear to me, and I believe it was clear to Barbados, that he approached this subject, this important piece of legislation, or proposed legislation, with the seriousness and with the maturity that it deserves. Mr. Speaker, I will not use the moments given to me to do what some people call the red herring thing. So I will not, Mr. Speaker, and I think the honourable member for St. Michael Southeast will be happy. I'm not going to talk about Spitesum. I'm not going to talk about things that may be tangentially related. I believe that the introduction of this bill into this honourable chamber demands that we focus on the reason why this bill is before this honourable chamber, the bill that is appended to the report, why it is before this honourable chamber at this time. Mr. Speaker, I stand here during Child Month, and I don't think that it should escape any of us that as a government, we recognize our responsibilities, we recognize our duty to those who are vulnerable in our society. And there are not many categories of persons who are more vulnerable than children. This morning, before coming to this honorable place, I had occasion to be at the All Saints Primary. It is referred to by my neighbors, not my neighbors in this honorable place, but my neighbors, as in those who live around me, as the college on the hill. Not only because it produced persons of the caliber as the Member of Parliament who preceded me, Professor, the Right Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur. It's produced the likes of former Senator Ainsley Benn. It's produced many luminaries. It's produced people who have excelled. But I was there this morning, Mr. Speaker, to discuss matters related to the development of our children. I spent the 2 weeks before the Barbados Secondary School's entrance examination similarly engaged with children at the 5 schools that are in the parish of St. Peter, the 5 primary schools that are in the parish of St. Peter. Mr. Speaker, I am also very sensitive to this legislation as the son of 2 teachers who together dedicated about 70 years, a little over 70 years of their lives combined to the profession, to the calling of educating young minds, caring for young minds. In my father's case, actually helping mothers write out the names of their children. I also stand here as the husband of somebody who currently is an educator. And so when I stand to support this child protection bill, I do so conscious of the fact that our children are our future. In more recent times, we've been hearing and we've been saying, and in a lot of cases agreeing, that our children are actually our present. I, like the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, have 2 daughters. And there is a stereotypical view that girls may be more vulnerable than boys. Now, I preface what I said by saying stereotypical. My first daughter, I believe, can hold her own with any boys. But there's that stereotypical view, and I say that and I use that only to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to say to this Honourable Chamber, that I am sensitive to the need to protect our young people. And I also know that if I fail in that duty, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East will take my head, because my older daughter sees her as her other father. But I said earlier that our children need to be protected. The bill that is appended to this report, Mr. Speaker, is a bill that is designed that as you examine it, you can recognize that it is crafted to protect that vulnerable group in our society, our children. I, Mr. Speaker, had cause to say in a previous discussion on discrimination some number of years ago that I will not be supportive of any kind of discrimination in this country. I will not support any discrimination against our children. Now, I am also aware that the notion of discriminating against children could be an interesting one to unpack. So I'm going to speak to what I'm referring to a little bit later. The fact of the matter is, we're living in 2024. Now, while the Honourable Member for Christchurch South said that he had no issues with the bill, there are people in the group that he leads. I was tempted to say organization, but organization suggests organization. And I said this to a member from the other place during lunch who was complaining about the fact that he is not good at English. But I try not to mess up and mess around with words. But the group, there are persons in that group that he leads that are of the view that there is no need to change legislation. We heard it from a former leader, one who, the Honourable Member who piloted this bill this morning, did a good service to the country by ensuring that he was no longer here. One who said that a 1919 or somewhere about piece of legislation against corruption was good enough for 2020 or 2018 or 2017. 100 years old. But that group, persons in that group, believe that legislation from 100 years ago can suffice. One must ask oneself the question, why? Is it that they believe they can hide behind the legislation? I don't want to believe that. Is it because they are too lazy to develop new legislation? While I don't want to believe that either, the evidence suggests that that is true. And so the party that I'm a proud member of is not a party that is looking for the path of least resistance. It is not a lazy party. It is not made up of lazy parliamentarians. It is not made up of lazy members of cabinet. And it definitely is not made up or not headed by a lazy prime minister. We are committed to doing right by the people of this country. We are committed to doing right by particularly the most vulnerable in this country. We have been elected to serve them. We will discharge our responsibility faithfully to them. I say through you, Mr. Speaker, to the people of this country and to all the young people, we will not run away from the responsibility we have to you. We will never do it. We will never do it. And so when you have a piece of legislation that was written in 1904, prevention of cruelty, and another piece of legislation that was written in 1918, this tells you that the folk who were thinking about this legislation were living in an 1890s Barbados. They were living in an 1890s Barbados. They were living at the time, Mr. Speaker, when the good people of Boscobel determined that this matter of hunger, people going hungry while plantations have potatoes, was not going to happen. And so one night in the 1890s, they rose up, they pelt Mr. Boyce, the watchman at Boscobel Plantation, formerly called Jeeves back in the 1700s, pelted him. But he tried his best, but the people were hungry. That is when this legislation, this ancient piece of legislation, was developed. At a time when we were not seen, we were emancipated legislatively, but we, people who look like me and you, Mr. Speaker, were going hungry. That is the era within which this legislation was conceived. We have a responsibility in 2024. Mr. Speaker, this is not the 1890s. This is not even the 1900s, the 20th century. We're now halfway through the third decade of the 21st century. And so it is right and fitting that we bring to this honorable chamber this child protection legislation. Now, just let me say something, because there are those who say Bajans have short memories. I heard the honorable member of Christchurch South throwing his now usual tantrum about the matter of an IDB survey. Now let me say to you, Mr. Speaker, even though I know the honorable member for St. Philip West will address him and that. You know when the first IDB survey was carried out in Barbados? A similar survey? 2017. You know who was in office at the time? And I understand there was one in 2013. You know who was in office in 2013 and 2017? The same group that he now leads. But as the Honourable Member for St. James Central often says, he prances up, hollers hard, as though he's been washed, cleansed, and sanctified. But let me say to him that when you're washed, cleansed, and sanctified, you tell the truth. But not just the truth, because he did not say anything that was not true. But when you are sanctified, you go a little further than just telling the truth. You tell the whole truth. You contextualize. You do not leave off that which is not convenient for you to mention. The Democratic Labour Party, when it was a party, when it was organized, when it was an organization, back in the good old days, there were these surveys done at that time. Now, there are also members of the Democratic Labour Party who speak in some newfound, strange way about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, I went back to the website, and it was not Wikipedia. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, when this convention was adopted by Barbados? Do you know, Mr. Speaker, when this Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted in Barbados? This convention was adopted in 1990. You know who was the government in 1990? 1990, Mr. Speaker, in case you've forgotten, was when my predecessor as Member of Parliament was saying to the country that it is not well, all is not well. 1990 is when the Democratic Labour Party, in its usual style, lied to the people of this country and said the economy is so good. It is, and I say this on the eve of the T20 World Cup, it is batting like sobers. There is an undercurrent of untruth, an undercurrent and a tendency to mislead on the part of the Democratic Labour Party. Now I understand that an opposition brings to the table a level of opposition politics. And that ought to be expected. But I'm calling on that group to be truthful, to be clear and upfront, transparent with the people of this country when it seeks to assign to this government matters that they were complicit in. Now, I'm not going into the fact that there is nothing, and I went through this last night and this morning, there is nothing in that convention. So I'm not opposed to the fact that the Democratic Labour Party adopted it and ratified it. I'm not opposed to that because I've gone through the convention and there is nothing in this convention except as it clearly intends, it is written in clear language to protect the young people of the world. I'll only add to what the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, to say not only in these conventions, but in what I refer to as my neck of the woods, in terms of international labor. There are conventions that are ratified by member states of the International Labour Organization. But there is always the possibility of saying, I am not assenting to this part of the convention. So it is not new It is not new to the country. It is not new to this government. And it is not new to governance in this country. The opposition, as fractured and confused as it is attempting to foist that same level of confusion and fracture onto a country that does not deserve it. They can do their thing. When they sort it out, they can come back. But don't draw the country into mess. Decent people don't do that. You know, when you got mess around your house, I don't know what happened in Bank Hall or wherever you were from, Mr. Speaker, but we used to get some sand, put the sand on the mess, you tell everybody don't walk in it, and then when you feel it dry enough, you take the shovel or whatever you got and you scoop it up and you go and bury it. You don't put people through mess. That is what the Democratic Labour Party is attempting to do to this country. The country doesn't deserve it. And Mr. Speaker, our children do not deserve it. Government, Mr. Speaker, in this legislation is moving to protect, to improve the protection of the children of this country. I find it absolutely interesting that a child protection bill, and I think, I really don't think it is genius. I think it is just the fact that the Barbados Labour Party brings a different approach to governance. But that we could have a protection of children bill before this honourable chamber that gives parents more rights than they had in existing legislation. It, to me, is absolute genius. I would have to call it genius, even though I ordinarily wouldn't think so, but because it seems to happen so infrequently outside of our being in office, it probably is. But this piece of legislation allows for the preservation, as far as is possible, of the family. And while this is Child Month, we should remember that tomorrow, the 15th of May, is the International Day of the Family, or families. I don't know if it's singular or plural. Tomorrow is the International Day for Families. This piece of legislation, far from trying to take up people's children, change the gender or the sex of people's children, that's the kind of nastiness is not parliamentary. Mr. Speaker, I've asked you before to give me a range of words that could be used. But I want to convey to the people of this country through you, Mr. Speaker, how I feel about, I use the word filth sometimes only because it is found in the King James Version of Scripture. And so it must be acceptable in this honorable chamber. But I compare the Democratic Labour Party approach to what the Bible refers to as filthy rights. The legislation that is appended to the report that we debate today contains nothing in it. Nothing in it, nothing at all that could even be conceived of as what a former leader of the opposition said was a slippery slope. And that is what boggles my mind. There is nothing in this legislation. Child care legislation in Barbados, the existing act, I think this is the 1983 piece of legislation, the Child Care Board. The existing legislation already allows, as it should, for agents of the state, when a child is in a position where remaining in that situation could cause death or serious injury, the state has a right to the vulnerable in our society to protect them. It has the right. It has, as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, beyond the right, it has a duty and a moral responsibility. You cannot say to a person who is in a situation that could result in loss of life, that could result in serious injury, that, well, you have to stay there. I'm going to see what can happen overnight. I'm going to come back tomorrow morning. You can't do that. That is like leaving an elderly person in a burning house. What kind of government would even want to do that? Why would you want to leave out of this legislation the authority for those who are charged with the care of our children? Why do we want to take away that authority to rescue our children? We have legislation that allows people to rescue animals. You mean we can have legislation to allow people to rescue human beings? And I don't mean any ill to those who love animals. No ill. But if you can have a prevention of cruelty to animals piece of legislation, why can't you have legislation that would protect my daughters when they were minors? That would not be a country that anybody should be living in. The law must allow for the protection of the vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the only reason why there is need for a government is because in the absence of government, there will be anarchy. The strong will oppress the weak, take advantage of the weak. The only reason why we exist is to make sure that the vulnerable in this country are protected. That is why we exist. And so we do not apologize, cannot apologize for saying in legislation that if a child is under threat of death or serious injury, we must move with dispatch, with alacrity. In Rosehill, we say you gotta move quick to rescue that child, to protect that child. We will not apologize for that. That is why we were elected. We were elected to ensure that the strong don't unfair the weak, that predator adults don't unfair little children. That is why we were elected. That is the reason why I am at my schools pretty often to speak to them. That is why our teachers in the system keep telling them about what is good touch and what is not good, appropriate touch. That is why we do that, because we have a responsibility to protect them. We will not, cannot apologize for that. Mr. Speaker, you know there are actually two passages in the Bible, but there is one in Matthew 18 that I take very seriously. I take it very seriously, and I mention it from time to time if I officiate at the dedication of a baby in my congregation at church. It's from Matthew 18:6. It says, in essence, I use my paraphrase, those who mislead God's little children, it would be better if a big rock, the Bible says a millstone, was tied around their neck and they were drowned, not in a pond, in the deepest part of the sea. That is how the God I serve sees children. That is how the God I want to be like sees children. And so that is the way I see children. Children are, as we say in our faith, a heritage, is in scripture actually. Children are a heritage of the Lord. I don't like using that particular version because I don't like the use of the word suffer. That's Old English, suffer. The word is allow. Allow the little children to come. Heaven belongs to them as well. Our protection must extend to our children. Now, in this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, there are a whole number of issues where the parent must be included in the discussion. So that my reading suggests to me that except for situations where there's the danger that I referred to earlier, the parent is always involved in the discussion. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, even in those danger situations, those situations where you gotta act quick, even in those situations, after the initial intervention, the parents still have to be part of the conversation. This bill is not about breaking up families. That is a wicked introduction into the public discourse by the Democratic Labour Party. This bill is not about that. And we should not be using a bill that is designed to protect our children in this crass political way. It is not right. Our children must be protected. They are vulnerable. They must know that we have their interests at heart. I've had cause to say to a congregation in the constituency of St. Michael's South Central, as they launch their child protection policy. Mr. Speaker, if you think that this bill is a long bill, well, UNC, that denomination's child protection policy, it is, if I'm not mistaken, maybe in the region of about 200 pages. I don't have a difficulty with it. But I want to repeat here what I said to them. And I said what I said to them based on the fact that there were people across Barbados, a minority though they are, but a minority that has the potential to infect other people. This minority was walking around Barbados saying things about the bill that did not exist, that were not part of the bill. Every time we discussing this thing, the Honourable Minister, Honourable Member for St. Michael's South, is asking, pulling out this here, he ain't got a whole lot of it, but pulling it out saying, but where that come from? That in the bill? Now, when I went to this church a Sunday morning, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, maybe a little bit more than that, late last year, because I was asked to speak, shared with them my thoughts on their policy. A very, very well-written policy. But Mr. Speaker, I said to them, and I asked them to speak to their colleagues. And I invited them to do what I had done. I said to them, I would never come to your church and speak about your policy without having read the policy. It won't be fair to them. I'm not talking the same kind of foolishness that a few in our society have been talking. Out of ignorance, not ignorance, out of ignorance. Because they are hearing other people, they're hearing the bad ones saying things, and then because they are so alarmed at what they hear somebody say, they're out with it without having read the bill. And as the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South has said, the bill has been around for a while. for months. So there's really no excuse. But I'm saying to those who may be commentators in our communities, in our society, if you're going to talk about something, find out about it first. Read it before you start mouthing off. There is nothing in this bill that will seek to tear families apart. There is nothing in this bill that will start us on some slippery slope to performing any kind of surgery on children, unless, of course, Mr. Speaker, and I know sometimes groups get infiltrated, I am hoping that there are no child predators who are infiltrating that organization trying to block this. I am hoping that there are no child abusers who are trying to infiltrate that organization, that group. And I'm going to beg the group to become an organization again, because you need to know who you're letting in. I mean, they're looking at who they're letting at the top, but they got other people who, while they're fighting about who letting at the top, who might be slipping in underneath. I hope there are no abusers trying to infiltrate and to stop us from protecting children. I will invite them to make sure that the people who are fighting this so strenuously don't have any ulterior motives. I do not want Arabar's party to be associated with child abuse or the lack of child protection. I say that, Mr. Speaker, as a Barbadian. No, I don't want to see them in office, but I don't think it is fair to the man who started the party for them to go in that direction. And so if they have made any mistakes in that regard, I think all they need to do is to come out and say, we have nothing to do with that person. That was their own view. And when they sort out how you expel people, then they can expel those others as well. Mr. Speaker, I don't think I need to detain the House any longer on this measure. The bill explains itself to a significant degree. There are certain obligations that persons have to report, that certain persons have to report. But I join the honourable member for St. Michael's South to encourage all Barbadians. This is not, when we're talking about children, this is not about snitching. I want to be clear about this. When we're talking about our most vulnerable, it is not about snitching. If you see somebody interfering with a child, do say something. Say something. Everybody is not caught up in the obligation to report. And it is because as a government, and we've said this through all the legislation that we've brought to this honorable chamber, but as a government, we do not believe that you can legislate a people into conformity on every single detail. We have to cover the important bases. But I want to appeal to everyone. If you come across a situation of abuse, particularly of a child, say something. Report it. Say something. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, is legislation designed, consulted on, and again, I don't need to repeat, there are Barbadians who believe we consult too much. But we're not going to tire of consulting. And you know, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why we will not tire of consulting is because that is how we came into office.
The honourable member has 2 more minutes.
Very good, Mr. Speaker, thank you. We came into office consulting with the people of this country. We went around the country rubbing shoulders. The government of the time thought that rubbing shoulders was a joke. There's this stereotype of politicians doing things before they assume office and then ignoring it after. I am saying to the people of this country, this Barbados Labour Party is not that kind of party, not that kind of government. We came into office consulting, we're going to continue to consult. But it was important for us to consult because there was no opposition, and based on what I've heard since February, there probably still is no opposition. And so to ensure that all views are able to contend, we will continue to engage the people of this country who have entrusted to us the reins of leadership, but who, on significant matters, we are determined that even though you've entrusted to us leadership, we will continue to consult, to hear your views, and to be guided by your counsel. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is one that I commend to this honorable chamber, is one that I commend to this country. It is one that I commend to all of the adults in this country who care about children. This is our mandate. This is what we must do because we are a government and a party in government that is focused in a laser-like way on protecting the most vulnerable in this country. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill whose time have truly come, as you heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael South say. It's been a long time in coming. So many other acts that relate to how we treat to children, how we protect children, are outdated. And this time, it is time for this bill to be here. Now, we have focused, sir, on a change in climate as it relates to our weather and our environmental conditions, sir, as we should, because it is urgent and it is necessary if we are to survive. I submit to you, sir, that we also need to focus on a change in climate as it relates to how we treat to children and to families, because that too will determine how we as a society, as a country, will be able to survive and to thrive. Now, I rise, sir, to support this bill not only because it is groundbreaking in what it is seeking to do to protect our children. I rise, sir, because in my capacity as Minister of Education, I have 43,000 children who fall within the charge of the ministry. And I believe that this bill will go a long way in supporting us in school and outside of school to be able to protect those children and truly to create a change in the social and cultural climate as it relates to how we speak to children. You know, sir, as I start out, I'm going to ask your permission for me to share a story. I will be discreet by not using any names or any gender so that anything can be revealed. But the value of this bill hit home with me. I remember it was just a few months after I assumed service at the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. And I had to call the Honourable member from St. Michael South, the now minister responsible for Elder Affairs and People Empowerment. And I called him to say, help me to rescue a child. Shortly after, I was able to successfully bring schools back to face-to-face instruction and learning. That was on February 21st of 2022. Shortly after that, there was this particular school that realized that a particular child was not showing up to school as that child ought to have done. Eventually, we sent the truancy teachers, the truancy officers, to go and find out what was happening. The child eventually showed up at school. And when the principal questioned the child as to why that child had not been at school over the period of time, certain things came out. One of the things that came out, and I am abbreviating this story because it is gruesome, sir, was the person said that they could not wear their school uniform, the proper school uniform. And when asked why, the child started to cry. The principal then took the child in a private area, and the child then showed the principal the back. An iron, sir, the one we use to iron our clothes, sir, the full print of that iron was in that child's back. And the thing about it is, sir, it had started to crust over. That child had received no medical attention for something as serious as that. And when I spoke to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, I said, but the instruction that was given can't be right. Because after, and again, sir, I am abbreviating the story because I know I have limited time on your floor. When the caregivers or the persons who were involved in investigating the situation gave an instruction that the child should then go home and tell their parents to come to the school the next day. Now, based on what we had uncovered up to that point, it was suspected, with good reason, that that abuse happened in the home and may very likely have been at the hand of an adult. So had that child now gone home to say, but the head teacher said to come to the school, we do not know what would have happened to that child. Their child may not have made it back to school the next day. And I want to thank the Child Care Board and the Minister for St. Michael South for the support they gave. And I raise that in the context of that debate because when we look at Clause 31, the fuzziness that surrounded that situation at the time is cleared up in Clause 31 because at that time the persons, the caregivers, the adult caregivers who were involved seemed a little unsure as to what they ought to have done and what they had the authority to do. And Clause 31, sir, of this child protection bill says that where the director has reasonable grounds to believe that the health or safety of the child is immediate or in imminent jeopardy, that they have, and I'm jumping to the end, they have the authority to simply take that child into custody there and then. And within 24 hours after, then file the orders with the courts and others. Sir, I support this bill because it's not simply about law. That example, sir, it is very much about the lives of our young people. And I find that this law, what it does in areas where other laws were silent or unclear, this law brings a level of specificity and a level of clarity that I think we now need. Sir, we have to collaborate as a government and as a society when it comes to protecting our vulnerable children. Children bring their whole selves to school, sir. Schools are a microcosm, a little mini world of society. And we must treat to the whole environment of that child. Sir, whenever we have seen a situation of exploitation or abuse within our school system, often when we look deeper with the social workers, we realize that that problem environment in which that child is existing is part of what is manifesting at school. Children bring their homes, they bring their communities, they bring their hosts, themselves, all of themselves, to school. And sir, when we talk about vulnerability of children, let me, when a child is at home, a child has no control over their food, not necessarily their shelter or their clothing, and therefore they have to take whatever they get if they wish to eat and they wish to sleep someplace. And that makes them vulnerable to those who are not fit, indeed, to care for them in a significant way. And sir, I am not only talking about homes, I have to speak about schools. Because you know as well as I do, sir, that some environments are not as safe as we would like. Many environments are quite safe, and I would say for the most part, we have a generally safe school system, particularly when we compare with others. But let us not put our heads in the sand and pretend that all is perfect. We have a situation where children do need protection in schools. Sometimes, sir, we are able to have children benefit from outstanding teachers and school leadership who take excellent care of our children. But sir, we are also aware that there are some within our systems who themselves do not conduct themselves in the way that we would want for our children. I cannot tell you how many complaints, sir, the ministry has received with regards to people who are adult authority figures within the school environment treating children in a way that you would not want for your child, sir. And you would believe, sir, that there is a code of ethics for teachers. Back in 1985, I recall the Barbados Union of Teachers and others had actually helped to draft that code of ethics for teachers. And the ministry had adopted it over the years, and I believe that the time has come now for us to revisit that. But in so many ways, that code of ethics continues to be valid in many ways. It says that the prime consideration and concern shall be the interest and welfare of students. It speaks that the teachers should act with humanity and dignity and discretion at all times in relation to students. It speaks about not discriminating against students. You heard the Honourable Member from St. Peter speak to that. It talks about not using professional relationships for exploitative or immoral pursuits. And sir, I have to tell you that certainly since I have been minister, whenever there has been a report of misconduct by adults within the school environment as it relates to teachers, particularly when it has to do with sexual advances towards children, I do not know why people still think that they need to go and interfere with the people's girl children and boy children. It is wrong. It is wrong on every different level, Mr. Speaker. And we have taken the action that is within the law for us as a Ministry of Education in terms of investigating the situation and suspending the offending parties until such time as the investigations are completed. But it still remains within the hands of the Ministry of the Public Service to carry it one step further once they have received the reports and determine what will happen with these individuals. For too many have been on suspension for too long who need to be away from our children. Sir, We recognize that as a ministry with responsibility for protecting our children in schools, we have to do better at training those persons who are teachers, who are school leaders, who are working within the school environment. And in fact, we have started that process, which I will share very briefly with you, sir, as we go forward. Children are vulnerable to predators. Mr. Speaker, you know, there was a time when children were exposed to what they learned in the community, what they learned at home. We now have the internet, sir. So family and friends and people in the community are not the only ones who are influencing these children. And it is important to ensure that as we speak towards protecting our children, we recognize that that protection not only has to extend to what we see in front of us physically and face to face, but it also has to extend to what happens online. And sir, I am pleased to tell you that the digital literacy curriculum of the Ministry of Education Technological, we are running it in pilot now, and we expect that we will soon be able to roll it out to all schools. It includes awareness. It includes fake news and social media. It includes cyber security. It includes the children being their own firewall and being able to know and identify those things that will be a harm to them, and then being able to know how to mitigate the risk of what is real. Sir, part of protecting children in schools relates to a topic that has been quite, I should say, topical, but more seriously, it is something that we have to look at more deeply. And that is the story of violence in schools. Schools have often been the places where we look at their intellectual capacity and their physical well-being, and we have worked towards ensuring that those environments are right. But there is also the psychological and the social well-being of the students that must now take on a far more important significance in how we educate as well as how we treat the children within the school environment. That social and emotional intelligence and that learning has to be a critical part of what we need to do. And I have to tell you, sir, very quickly, in providing that kind of support to our students, we have certainly since 2020, sir, increased the number of the persons, the officers in our student support services unit. We have increased them, sir, from 12 to 33. It is still not enough, but it demonstrates that the ministry is seeking to continue to partner, whether that has been with the Maria Holder Foundation, or it has been with the Sandy Lane Trust, or it has been with others. We have been able to augment our capacity for not only counselors in the schools, but social workers. And social workers are important because oftentimes we need wraparound services for the child. It is not just the child who is manifesting behavior that is undesirable. It is also that oftentimes the environment from which that child is coming, we also need to provide some support in order to help the child. And so that support of not just counselors who counsel them through issues, but also the social services who are able to bring to bear a whole bunch of other services to support them is important. We recognize, sir, that the professional development for our officers, that is important, sir. And we have now, over the last 2 years, we have now trained all of our student services officers in a number of different interventions and otherwise. Sir, in terms of ensuring that our students too are in a position to identify when something that is not right is happening, we have also sought to make them more aware of what is a good approach and what is not a good approach, so that they can now recognize, be able to identify it, and then be able to seek help. We have done better, sir, in terms of putting additional programs in place so that where children believe they need a place to turn, there are more programs that are currently in place. And we have taken a multi-sectoral approach whereby we have brought in persons from mental health, from juvenile justice, from counseling services, and others to ensure that our programs are better suited to fit the children. And sir, none of what we do will make sense if we don't get the parents involved. And certainly, sir, our senior school attendance officers, they have hosted programs for parents and children over time. This year alone, 225 students and parents from 17 schools have attended, and they've dealt with predatory behaviors, the consequences of drugs, school attendance and the law, and a whole number of other issues. And sir, I have to say to you that even as we seek to work together with parents, we have met with the unions, the teachers' unions, the principals' unions, and the Parents Association, the Students' Council, and we are putting together a task force to address violence in school. We expect that that task force should be set up by the end of July. Sir, I know that my time is short, and I see you giving me the eye as we speak.
Honourable member, you know I am the adjudicator.
You are an adjudicator,
Yes,
sir.
I am the referee.
Give me the
so
opportunity to deal.
I determine the time frame.
Yes, sir. And I will respect you, sir.
So I ain't giving the hints. I ain't blowing the balls. So
All right, sir. Sir, I want, sir, as it relates to this bill, to speak to clause 24. That clause speaks to the responsibility for mandatory reporting by those who have a duty of care. And I touch on that clause, sir, because it speaks to teachers being a duty bearer to report where they believe that there has been abuse or exploitation or harm done to a child. School principals, sir. Other teaching professionals. Social workers, kind of like those we have in schools, and other social services professionals that include our guidance counselors. Any person who provides, among other things, the clause says, education wholly or in part. It goes on to say, sir, that these persons who have the obligation to say something if they see something, they don't get to turn a blind eye and say, I am not in that. They have an obligation to report in the event that they have good reason and evidence to believe that this child is in a situation where the child might need some type of protection. And they may choose, according to this clause, sir, to report themselves or to cause the incident to be reported. They also, sir, can make a report anonymously. And also, sir, the point made at 24/7 is that, and should they fail to report, as is their mandatory obligation, it can make them guilty of an offense. Sir, we within the school system have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, as well as a legal responsibility to protect students. And there is more that I want to say about this bill with regards to its completeness in so many ways. It does not mean that there are not other things we need to discuss, because it speaks to children who, of course, fall within our catchment area, and it does not speak to every type of child who would need certain types of protection, particularly some of those children who are in the school system, who are exhibiting certain behaviors, and the approach is not to move them to the child justice side, but we need to catch them before that happens, that some type of facility needs to be provided that catches them when they are in between. And we know those discussions started with the Ministry of Elder Affairs and People Empowerment in earnest, and we look forward to us being able to settle on what solutions for those kinds of students could be. Sir, as I begin to close, there were a couple of matters, sir, that were raised by the Honourable Member for Christchurch South in relation to the Ministry of Education. Sir, the Honourable Member referred to an incident in Government Hill. I imagine, sir, that the Honourable Member may have been referring to a situation at Springer Memorial School recently when a simulation was done. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, spoke of opinions when the Honourable Member from St. James South stood on a point of order. But sir, there is a difference between opinions and facts. The Honourable Member may have been speaking his opinion, but sir, I have a responsibility to bring you the facts and bring this honourable house and this country the facts. Fact number one, all schools run drills. It is a normal part of preparing our teachers and our students and members of staff to face various eventualities that will occur in school from time to time, whether that is fire or we get earthquakes or some other situation that requires a special emergency response. Sir, drills have been done in schools for years. I believe, Mr. Speaker, you might remember there was a time in school when they would ring the bell and you would get up and get in line and you all would march out on the pasture and hold hands in twos or in single file, and you were told what you were supposed to do in different situations. Sir, drills have been done in schools for years. That is fact number one. Fact number two is that schools are not required to get permission from the ministry. They simply, because of the nature of drills that have been done for years and years and donkey years, sir, all they simply do is inform what is happening. And they also have to inform their boards where they're at secondary school, sir. Sir, fact number three is that on Tuesday, the 10th of October, the ministry received a letter signed by the principal of the institution informing, not requesting permission, informing the ministry, as has been the norm for years, that there would be a drill. And sir, if you would permit me, I would like to enter as a document of the House the letter which I will read, dated October 10th. It says, "Dear Madam Chief, I am respectfully informing you that the Springer Memorial School will be conducting a lockdown drill on Wednesday, the 11th of October in the AM. This letter is dated the 10th of October. It will be supported by the Barbados Police Service and the Barbados Defense Force, who will provide an ambulance. Your understanding in this matter is appreciated." Sir, at no point in time was there any indication that this is outside the ordinary of drills that even you from your schoolboy years, sir, and all of us in here would have experienced. We could not have known, sir, as a ministry. We did not know as a ministry. Nothing in that letter alerted the ministry that the Health and Safety Committee would use such an innovative approach to what have been normal drills over time. Nothing in that letter spoke to that, sir. And clearly, the simulation exercise was planned not as an ordinary drill, sir, but it was planned in a way that was unfamiliar. And none of the other schools had done that. So it was a very innovative team of the Health and Safety Committee of the school that had planned this and executed this. But sir, let's not deal with recriminations or what would happen what happened then. Let's just say that on Wednesday the 11th, as soon as the ministry became aware of the nature of the exercise, we made sure that we dispatched education officers up there right away to help to handle the situation. Sir, we then had an investigation. And while that investigation was going on, sir, you may remember, sir, that we made sure that up there was flooded with counselors of all sorts to help those who had been negatively impacted. We suspended school to give relief. And we made sure that the necessary support services were put in place. This is for an exercise that the ministry was not aware was of the nature that it was, for which we needed to give no permission, because in the past there had never been any permission. It was not the act, it was not the custom. We were simply informed the day before, and as you heard from the letter, sir, we were assured that there were certain stakeholder agencies that were involved. But sir, going forward, it took us a few days speaking with individuals and groups and other people who were in that environment to unravel what really happened. Because as you know, sometimes people in the heat of the moment don't tell you all. It took us a few days, several days actually, to finally pick through and find out what really happened. And what I will say to you is, what did we do once we discovered? Without exposing anybody, because that is not my style, the right disciplinary action was taken against those who were responsible, number one. And number two, the ministry, through our chief education officer, sent a message, in fact, met with principals and informed the principals that there would be no further drills or simulation exercises until further notice. In the meantime, what are we doing? We are simply working, and we now have a national coalition that includes the police, the fire, the defense force, the government guards, the parents association, the students association, all of the unions, in putting together now the first ever national security and safety policy for this country. The document is now in its final draft stages, and we expect to have that before cabinet within the next few years. So, sir, I hope that that clears up that incident. There are those who will have us believe that some school was chosen. The ministry had nothing to do with it. The school self-selected, and when some people would use the words, sir, the honourable member from Christchurch South used the words, sir, that said those girls were stereotyped and victimized. Those words were used in here today, sir. The Ministry of Education never used those words. What I have presented to you is fact, sir. What he was saying about those girls were stereotyped, and it's his opinion, sir. And if that is his opinion of the special children that we have in this country, let him own his own thoughts. But let him not foist it on our ministry or on this country, because that is not the way we refer to children. If those are his thoughts, sir, all I said is I leave him. I leave him and those thoughts to God. Sir, the second, if you will give me a moment, sir, to deal with is this IDB survey. Sir, in starting again, I will make this a document of the House. It is the statement that was written by the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, immediately in the wake of that. Not only was the statement sent to the press, it was their press statement, but it was carried in the media. But I will make the original document a document of this House, sir, with your permission. And sir, I will read. The statement says, the Inter-American Development Bank expresses regret that a survey administered by the bank to children in the Barbados secondary school system has offended many Barbadians. The bank sincerely apologizes, but stresses that no offense was intended. This is the part, sir. The questions at the center of concern, to which the Ministry of Education had objected prior to the administering of the survey, and which were inadvertently left in the paper, have been removed. Sir, I want you to understand, the ministry had examined the questions. We had launched our objections. And in the very same press statement, they said, sir, the questions at the center of concerns to which the Ministry of Education had objected prior to the administering of the survey and which were inadvertently left in the paper have been removed. The ministry and I took responsibility because this happened under my watch. And as any good leader, once it is that you are in the chair at the time, you take the lash for whatever happened. But surveys like these, there are other members of this honorable house who have been ministers of education. A survey going out at the beginning of a project never comes to a minister. There's always some project going on in some school or some class or some course going on. If at 100 and somebody schools, the minister was to look at every single thing a teacher or somebody administering were to look at, there would not be a whole lot of time for you to do anything else. But sir, this continues. The IDB recognizes its position as a development partner with the government of Barbados with a long and mutually respectful relationship, and assures the Barbadians it would not deliberately engage in any practice that will harm that relationship. In the interests of Barbados' national interests, where we have significant programs going on with IB, let's just say in one of the meetings where I went to Washington, we had some very clear conversations. And it was made very clear that the consultant who was a part of ignoring at that time, and I should not say that, sir, because those questions, according to this, were inadvertently left in. So those who inadvertently left in those questions, we have made it clear that we would not wish to be associated with them any further. And what have we done since, sir? We have started the work on a policy which we expect to be implemented starting this coming September, that will see that anybody going into our schools to do surveys of a type that isn't normal. Remember, it isn't every single survey or every single question that will be asked of a student that you can possibly have go through this process. Because if not, a class, you're doing a class on a home economics class, and you want to ask about what foods they like to eat, etc. Those kinds of things those are a normal part of running a school and would not normally come. But we are now putting in place a system that allows that when you have significant surveys of this sort, it has to be vetted by an internal committee that will then give the go-ahead. And that before any survey is administered, we must make sure that where adjustments were to be made to the questions, that we actually make sure that that is exactly what they administer and that nothing else can be inadvertently left in. Sir, I hope that you have not only now had the full expose of the facts on what has happened with the evidence, which I am prepared to leave as documents of this House, but you know that this is a learning government. That where something happens that we could not have anticipated or that we did not instigate or create, when it arises, as things will do, we are seeking to put the policies in place and to take the immediate action that looks out for people first, our children first, as well as for the integrity of government. Sir, there's so much more I would like to say, but I believe my time is up. And I wish to thank you for your indulgence with these few words, sir.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support this bill in a similar vein to the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South, who is piloting the bill, first as a parent and as the Minister of Youth. Mr. Speaker, I would say to you that I was a pro-lifer. And then I became a father. And I went on another Damascus road because I had no issues at all. At that time I was catching bus. Getting off the bus in Station Hill and engaging trapdoors because I had now become a father. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we should go the full distance in relation to this bill. I believe that there should be a national register with all pedophiles on this island. And I will stick by that, Mr. Speaker, because I believe and I will vacillate between the father and the Minister of Youth as it relates to my brief entry this evening on this bill. We have to protect what I believe is our most valuable, the most valuable of our citizens, our children. And if we're gonna bring this bill, I believe, like I said, that we should go the whole 9 yards, because the Honourable Member who just took her seat mentioned predators. And those of us who are on the ground in society know that there's some men who would say to you that anytime after 11 is lunch. And hence I again say that we need to be serious in relation to how we treat to this bill today, Mr. Speaker. And every single one of our young children deserve to be in a safe and nurturing environment, one that is free from fear, violence, and exploitation. And I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, that all of this is happening on island. And when I speak a little bit about the ministry as well, I will share my thoughts on how I believe that we should treat to that. Our young people, Mr. Speaker, are the ones who will rock the cradle of our future. And if we don't protect them now, then I'm not sure who will protect them. And this government continues to be proactive as it relates to several issues relating to our young people here on island. And I'm prepared, Honourable Member from St. Michael's South, to work with you because I think that there's a need to have information in the public's domain in relation to child protection. And I mentioned government being proactive, and I will share now some of the things, Mr. Speaker, coming from the ministry that will assist the honourable member as it relates to this. And it was mentioned earlier that if you see something, you should say something, from the honourable member for St. Peter, I believe. And hence last year, January, government through my ministry launched the National Youth Hotline specifically for this purpose, Mr. Speaker. To help protect our children from all of the predators that are out there, I was involved, Mr. Speaker, in sports as a coach. And I heard the word coaching because it is what I did. Not realizing until recently that there's such a thing as coaching in terms of those same predators who would use social media and cell phones to encourage our young people to be involved in nefarious acts. And when I heard about this coaching, I was like, this is a totally different thing for me. Mr. Speaker, that hotline is an avenue for persons who witness wicked things happening to our children. It is an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for some of our young people as well to call and to get help in terms of what they're going through. Mr. Speaker, the mentorship program at the ministry is also one that is put in place to assist with our young people, because oftentimes, and honourable member, when I mention the assistance that I can offer, oftentimes a lot of adults, a lot of parents do not recognize the nonverbal cues that are seen to them that these children are being impacted in a negative way. We have mothers, Mr. Speaker, who experience the postpartum depression, and their fathers that are not aware of it, their members in the household that are not aware of it, and we have mothers who, maybe through no fault of their own, harm their own offspring. And honourable member, I am prepared through the digital program at my ministry to start the process of making 1-minute videos to put in the public's domain that will provide quality information about all of these things that are happening within households. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we need a community response in relation to this, and hence, like I said, we need to have information out there. There should be a media blitz as it relates to this particular bill to protect our children and to ensure that best practices ensue. Mr. Speaker, at the ministry, we have made sure that all of our coaches engage in that safeguarding course that will provide them with an opportunity and let them know that certain touches and certain things that they do as it relates to sports is not on. These are the things, Mr. Speaker, that I believe we need to communicate. These are the things that should be in the public's domain. Our children, Mr. Speaker, go through a lot. I know a member of the teaching profession, and I believe, honourable member, that it is necessary again for these nonverbal cues to be put in place for the teaching profession, because I'm not sure that all of them, and I'm not saying in any way that some teachers are not fully aware, but we need to understand that if there's a child who was bubbly and all of a sudden that child is an introvert, that something is wrong. We need to be able to pick up on the nonverbal cues. If a child is over-aggressive, we need to understand and have a conversation to see what is happening at home. Mr. Speaker, abuse ran the whole gambit in terms of things that can happen to our children. And we need to be able to identify and address all of these signs of abuse before it gets too late. I recently saw a video, I don't know if it is how old it is, about a video about a mother who tied the hands of her 4-year-old child and then proceeded to throw that child in a swimming pool. The hurt and pain, Mr. Speaker, that we see in society as a result of the abuse to children can only result at the end of the day of these children in turn being abusers. And I believe that this child protection bill will go a long way on the landscape of this country in terms of making wrong things right. I've heard the honorable member said that this is changing a bill that was in existence for over 100 years. Mr. Speaker, we need to ensure that with the passage of this bill, that everything is put in place to make sure that at the end of the day, our young people benefit. I have 2 primary schools in the constituency of St. John. At Mount Tabor, there are 254 students. At St. Margaret's, 108. And we need to ensure, and I need to ensure, that those youngsters in the primary system in St. John are given a fighting chance to be able to live and to realize their absolute true potential. And I know that this government will continue to do whatever is necessary, put every single thing in place to make sure that we have well-rounded adults. And at the Ministry of Youth, we're doing every single thing in our power at the Ministry of Youth to make sure that that is the end result. All of the programs at the ministry, we have provided life skills that will allow those youngsters that we touch to benefit from programs that will allow them to, in some cases, take care of self, and in some cases, to help them to take care of others, because if each one teach one, then we would have a ripple effect where the whole landscape, the whole 50,000 plus people, young people that I'm responsible for at the ministry, benefit from this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this bill will redound to the benefit of parents. I think oftentimes there are a lot of parents that struggle in terms of the socio-economic situation. And, they lash out at children who are vulnerable, absolutely vulnerable. And if we can move in a direction where we are helping those parents at the community level through our youth groups, through our community groups where the information is provided, then we can see at the end of the day a productive young person coming to the fore. One who, like I said before, will take care of our tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, I said I would be brief. And what I want to say in closing, Mr. Speaker, is that I want all of us to stand in solidarity with our children. And let us work tirelessly to build a future where every single child on this island can thrive in a safe and secure environment. I am obliged.
Honourable Member for Christchurch.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this legislation. Mr. Speaker, it is almost a nonsense for me to say and start by saying raise to support the legislation, because at certain parts, so I believe, I actually felt like the honourable member for St. Michael's South was my twin. I guess in a rare situation, sir, we had a suite of legislation being done across ministries that was being done in parallel. Under the honourable member for St. James North, the initial child justice legislation started, and I must start by congratulating and commending him for being, I guess, the instigator of the entire process. He was there shepherding the process, initializing the process, spearheading the process, agitating the process, and it is just served by a shuffle that he's not the person who is actually delivering it. But he gave me a good wicket on which to score a lot of runs. But as I said, sir, this is that situation where two complementary pieces of legislation were being done across ministries and were literally being drafted together. So the consultations that were happening in relation to the child protection legislation were also happening in relation to the child justice legislation. We engaged most of the exact same stakeholders in it. We engage each other quite often if there came a need to adjust or amend something in one piece of legislation that was communicated to the next ministry to see if it impacted on their legislation. So this was a joint effort, sir, in the best spirit of what I believe government and parliament is all about. The child justice legislation, as I said, sir, started first and got to a point where the legislation was almost ready to be presented into parliament. But because one mustn't just look at what the legislation is or the legislative agenda of government is, but we also have to look at how we project government's policies and how we declare what government's priorities are. And it was deemed, sir, that it would not send the best message to be seeking to pass the child justice legislation, i.e. the legislation that deals with children that are already in conflict with the law, without first finishing the child protection legislation, the legislation that is deemed to take care, look out for the children, and actually keep them out of conflict in many instances with the law. So that legislation was held back so that we can move forward together. And I'm glad, sir, that we've gotten exactly to this point where they were considered together in a joint select committee. The amendments were made together. We're not debating them together, sir, because, as I said, they focus on different things, but they're being debated against the same basis or the same information. But they are two completely different pieces of legislation, both touching and concerning the rights of children outside the judicial system and within the judicial system. So I want to start by complimenting and thanking all those who had a part to play in this entire process. They were singled out before, sir. They will be singled out again, so I'm not going to go through all those. But, sir, I want to thank those who had a critical part to play in this process. I'm only going to single out. I won't single anybody, sir. I will, as well, though, mention the Honourable Member for St. Thomas. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas was there at the beginning. She played a part in both. She was available, sir, for us to bounce the ideas off of, and was one of the resource persons for both pieces of legislation. So although neither falls to her direct credit at this point in time, her contribution and stewardship and influence cannot be understated and cannot be ignored. So I wish to congratulate her for that. Sir, I propose to narrow my presentation. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South gave an excellent overview of the legislation this morning. He touched on all of the factors that were raised in the public. He touched on the factors that were raised in the select committee. He touched on those factors that are swirling through misinformation. He touched on personal aspects, and he drew from his own personal knowledge and his love of children. And I wish to commend him for what was an excellent presentation. I don't wish to go back over a lot of what he said because, quite frankly, there's no need to. He explained in a way that leaves no room for further explanation. What I will do is point to certain aspects that touch on concern the legal aspect of it, some of the interpretation and explanation as to why we have certain sections in, and try to expand on those. The one thing I will start by saying is I do note that despite having engaged the chamber for the better part of 45 minutes, effectively on a frolic of his own, the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, at the end of the day, had not one single objection to the legislation. If this was a real debate, in terms of debate, sir, where points were being scored, at the end of the presentation by the member for Christchurch South, quite frankly, the member for St. Michael South could simply have gotten up and said, I rest my case, and we would be out of here all now. But I just wish, sir, to say that despite all that we heard, despite all the misinformation, despite all the fear-mongering, despite all the disinformation, that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition did not object to anything at all in this piece of legislation. And actually, sir, he said he likes to take notes, sir, and to make sure his quotes are good. Then I wish to do the same thing. He said any legislation which portends the protection of children must be supported. Right? He said it was the input, I'm trying to claim credit here, it was the input by the Democratic Labour Party which led to the amendments of the legislation which resulted in this final piece of legislation in which we are all pleased. I don't know how he actually managed to work the DLP, sir, into this piece of legislation. But you know what? I prefer to just omit the negative and take the positive that he said we now have a piece of legislation in which we are all pleased. If it is one thing I extract from that, I'll extract that and leave the other insane ramblings, sir, to fall where they will for whoever else wants to pick them up. Sir, he also said the consultants and the consultations forced the government to alter the bill. Right? And again, he said, I commend any legislation which focuses on protection as opposed to punishment. So, I don't know, sir, if the Honourable Member cast his mind back to the time before he became the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Because from the time we were drafting this, and from the time it was contemplated, it was at all points in time the intention to send this to Select Committee. At all points in time. It was going to be presented, sir, and then when it was finished being presented, it was going to be referred to Select Committee for consultations, open to the wider Barbadian public, and then to have a final report in probably the most thoroughly consultative piece of legislation or brace of legislation that we've ever had in Barbados. So I don't know where the Honourable Member for Christchurch South gets to claim that consultations forced the government into doing X or doing Y or forced the alteration of the bill. We presented the best version that we could at the time. We also made allowances for the fact with the best advice from the CPC, with the best advice from UNICEF, with the best advice from all the other stakeholders, right? We are still a small select group. And if we throw it open for the widest possible consultation, then some things may come out, or some concerns may be raised, or some suggestions may be tabled, which with the wide consultation before can still be accommodated at that stage. The aim was not to prove that we were better than anybody else. The aim was to come out of this process with the most holistically complete piece of legislation that we possibly could. So the consultative process where the bar and the Child Protection Agency and everybody else was invited, and persons who had their vocal objections were invited to contribute, was not a punishment by us. It was not an embarrassment to us. This was a justification of the decision to embark upon a consultative process. As the Honourable Member for St. Peter said, we're probably the most consultative government that Barbados has ever had. We came into government consulting, we are governing consulting, and we will continue to consult. There are some things, sir, I mean, at some point in time, you just have to govern. Everything does not require consultation. But sir, when something is changing a process, it's changing the way we think, it's changing a culture, it has the potential to cause divisions among the citizenry. When things are of that import or that complication, then yes, we will go to consultation. Simple amendments to simple things, then we're going to govern and just get those over and done with. So I wish to disavow, because some people look upon the leader of the opposition because he's an eloquent speaker. He's a good speaker. He's a convincing speaker. And unless you pay close attention to him, you may think he's talking sense all the time because he sounds authoritative. Or you may think he's talking the truth all the time because he sounds authoritative. It is therefore critical that people actually listen and don't let anybody form their opinions for them. Sir, I am glad that we went through this process. I followed all of the select committee hearings because I wanted in particular to hear some of the persons who had been fear-mongering actually present their petition before the committee, to have each and every concern they had addressed, ventilated, and resolved. What became apparent, sir, is that a number of people who even actually came before the committee had never read the bill. I had the occasion to have a conversation with one of the most vocal of the persons opposing and objecting to this bill. And I asked them, why are you objecting? Sir, they quoted some things on the horizon foretelling doom and gloom to Barbados, the decay of our society, the collapse of our institutions, and the transgenderism of our children. Right? They gave me a litany of their fears. And I said, okay, where is it? They raised these in relation to the child justice legislation. And I said, but I actually was hands-on in drafting, down to every clause. I was involved in the drafting of it. And none of what you say is in there. So please, let us go through this paragraph by paragraph, clause by clause, and show me what concerns you. They then said, well, it wasn't really the child justice legislation, it was more the child protection legislation. I said, well, interestingly, I was actually quite hands-on in drafting that too. And I asked them to point me to the exact provisions which is giving them pause and concern. And then the person admitted to me, well, they had actually not read it themselves, but they were so advised. That, sir, is the crux of all of the problems with the public reception of these two pieces of legislation. Some persons with an agenda to serve ran along on a tangent and on a frolic of their own. And because they stirred such fear on such sensitive topics, persons registered the fear and didn't bother to check for themselves. I will bet you, sir, the majority of Barbadians have actually not read every section of this legislation. It has been up on the Parliament's website. The report of the Select Committee has been up on the Parliament's website. And people still actually don't know it was there, although it was said over and over that it was on the Parliament's website. So I'm going to ask this, sir, going forward. For those who wish to make their fears public and to put their fears out in the public domain as fact, then at least read and understand what it is that you are purporting to represent. Because what we have done is made a lot of people afraid about one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation whose sole purpose, the sole object of this piece of legislation is to protect our children, our most vulnerable. Sir, if we go to one of the contentious things, and that is the mandatory reporting. A lot of persons were concerned about the mandatory reporting. What does this mean for them if they see something and they don't say, can they be arrested and carried away? When we think of the mandatory reporting, let us start by understanding once again that we're dealing with literally the most vulnerable section in our community. I think when you look at the tier and the levels of vulnerability in our society, children come at the top. At the top are children. And these are not just any children. These are children who, by virtue of their circumstance, are even more vulnerable than the ordinary child. The children contemplated by this legislation, sir, who are in need of care and protection, are children who don't have a parent. Who don't have a parent that cares. Who are being mistreated. Who are being abused. So it is not the average child in the average school. It is not 95% of the children in our primary school or secondary school system. It is those ones who find themselves by virtue of circumstance where they ain't got nobody to look out for them, or the people who are supposed to look out for them don't care and are not taking the job seriously. So the majority of criminal cases collapse on the basis of lack of evidence. The majority of sexual offenses cases collapse because the virtual complainant does not give the evidence. And without the evidence of the virtual complainant, the principal person, the victim, the injured party, then there's nothing else for the court to accept as fact on which to base a conviction. That's the same thing here. We relied for a long time on the children to give the evidence, on the children to make the report, on somebody to make the report on behalf of the child, but the child still had to say something. And if you get a child, sir, if a parent is abusing a child, let's go with the parents. If a parent or relative is abusing a child, and the child knows no other circumstance other than being in a house or being in a circumstance with that person, and the child is in front of an authority figure, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a magistrate, whether it be somebody else, in that child's mind is all well and good for me to say X. If I say X, daddy can get in trouble. And then I going back home to that same house with daddy. At which point the child is not saying anything. The case falls apart. It falls apart. In order to protect the child, you have to take the 100% burden on that child to report and spread that burden around other people who should have the child's best interests at heart. That's what it is. If the child is unprepared to go through with giving the evidence and is unprepared to make that report, who should we be looking for that evidence from? Because quite often, sir, when things are happening to a child, actually not even a child, when things are happening to a victim and have been happening over a period of time, somebody does know. And if it gets to the point where somebody is convicted, then people say, hey, they always know so-and-so is going on. Hey, they always know he was beating she. But you couldn't hear that child crying all the time. That's the neighbors, that's the auntie, that's the whoever. But for some reason, we have a culture almost in Barbados that people don't want to get involved. I ain't want to be the body to put them in trouble. But if you choose to not put the perpetrator in trouble, then you're perpetuating the child as the victim. So the law says, you know what? We need to actually start to put some responsibility on people who have a duty to look out for that child. And who are those people? If you think about it, sir, it makes sense. It's not if I do not know the child of the Honourable Member for St. Michael South. If I do not know his child, I don't know him, and I see him do something with that child, sir, there's no burden on me to say anything. I could turn my back, let my conscience guide me, right? And walk away and leave what can happen to happen. However, if I am that child's teacher, I am in what they call in loco parentis, in the position of a parent. And I see that child coming with bruises, and that child falling on a little bit too often, and the child fainting at school because the child had nothing to eat. It is my duty, because the child regards me as an authority figure, as a person worthy of trust, as a person standing in the place of a parent, as a person from whom that child accepts instruction or rebuke or love. The child sees me as that figure. I now owe the child a duty of care to look out for that child in the same way that that child sees me. It is not a burden that we're throwing on someone with no connection to the child. Who else is considered a doctor? I remember my pediatrician as a child, sir. Every time I used to get a sweetie. I actually used to enjoy going to the doctor. I used to get a sweetie. Right? But you regard a child has a relationship with that doctor. The child must be in a position to tell the doctor what is wrong. If I can't tell you, my doctor, what is wrong with me, then you can't treat me. I build a relationship. If you, the doctor, come to know by your examination, if even the child doesn't tell you, and you come to see from your examination that this child is being abused, you have a duty to alert the authorities. I'm going to run through the list of persons, so it's critical. I'm going to run through the list of persons. Mandatory reporting. This section shall apply to a parent, a medical practitioner, a health practitioner, dental practitioner, a nurse, or other mental health practitioner. All these persons have a responsibility towards a child. I think by their oath they should do no harm and whatnot. An administrator of a hospital or medical facility, once again, somebody having some sort of responsibility for the well-being of that child. A school principal, teacher, or other teaching professional. Well, sir, quite frankly, as a teacher, your duty is to the children who are under your care. If you don't accept that duty, you should not be teaching. When that child the child probably spends more waking time with their teachers than they do with their parents. You, the teacher, and those in the school, you have a duty to act in the best interest of those children. If they are there for your protection, your guidance, you are shaping them. One of the most influential people to me, one of the most influential people was a woman called, so if I may call her name, Miss Malta Franklin. Malta Franklin, a lady from St. Philip. There were some other teachers, Miss Grayston Wells, Mr. Russell, right? Who, they shaped me. They had as much input into my personality and who I became as my parents. If they told me something, what they told me right up there with what my parents told me. They had a duty to do right by me. These are the persons who are included. Sir, a social worker or other social service professional, well, that one made sense. A law enforcement officer, that one made sense. This one was raised by the Honourable Member for Christchurch South. For St. Michael South. An internet provider, film technician, computer technician, or telecommunications technician. Why? Because those persons are perfectly placed to discover things that other people can't. They're perfectly placed to discover things that other people can't. This is now the age of telecommunications. This is the age of visual images. Every single one of us can be a film producer, a photographer, a broadcaster. This, one of the best things ever invented. This, one of the worst things ever invented. And sir, the majority of people capture their foolishness on their phone. For some reason, people think it is a good idea to take pictures of the wrong things that they do. To me, sir, if I'm doing wrong, but let me not use me. For the arbitrary third party, sir, if the person goes to do something wrong, one would think that they would want no evidence of it. Half of the pedophiles are caught and tracked by what is on their devices. They're caught and tracked by their footprint, their digital footprint that they have in relation to searches on the net and things that they transfer. So that is why these people are included. If you have to go into somebody's phone, if you're fixing a phone, something, and you see images in there that cannot be explained, that harken to something being wrong, you have a duty, to disclose it. Sir, we go forward very quickly. Any person who provides health care, welfare, education, religious child care, law enforcement services, wholly or in part to a child. This is somebody who is normally doing these things. Standard. And this, sir, is what you call the wrap-up clause. Any other person who, by virtue of the nature of their work, owes a duty of care to a child. So although you are not mentioned there, it means the list is not exhaustive. Legislation is meant for evolving situation. We can't just legislate now for now. Something may come up later that should have been captured. We have to make provisions to capture it. If, sir, common sense dictates by virtue of what it is that you do, that you actually should have a duty of care to a child, then the court is going to put that duty of care on you, whether or not you're mentioned here. Now, sir, people will then say, but you know, what is this going to do to me? How does this affect me if I, as a doctor, go and report that a child is being abused? That might hamper my patients, my ability to get patients. The legislation also provides, sir, for the reports to be made anonymously. All you do is protecting yourself. You can call the police. You can call the director. You can make the report anonymously. Bring it to the attention of the authorities. Once it is brought to the attention of the authorities, sir, they cannot ignore it, even if they don't know who it came from. If a report validly comes in, sir, to the director or to anybody concerned in this legislation that a child is being abused and sufficient specifics are there to identify the child and the nature of the abuse, the authorities have no option but to investigate, and you have discharged your duty. If it ever drills down and somebody says, well, you know, this person went to this doctor, right, and the doctor should have known, then the doctor can say, okay, I actually did submit it anonymously. My duty has been discharged. So you don't have to put yourself out there to be vilified. What you have to do is do the right thing. Provide sufficient evidence that the child can be identified and the nature of the abuse identified, and the authorities can take the steps to secure the protection of the child. Once that child has come to the attention of the authorities, everything else kicks in to protect the child. This is not, sir, the child justice arena now, where at the end of the day you still need beyond a reasonable doubt. This is protection. Not even on a balance of probabilities. You would probably err even more to the side of caution than even a 50%. Once there is a suggestion, once it is credible that a child is in danger, the authorities have to act. They investigate, they read it out, and then they make the right decision in the best interest of the child. Well, you may say, I don't want, I suspect, I got a feeling that this little boy getting abused, but I ain't certain. Well, the legislation caters for that too. If you make a report in good faith, in the interest of that child, and for some reason you are wrong, but they can see how you got there and that you actually had the interest of the child at heart, you are not guilty of anything. You are blameless. It is better that you made that and they get to investigate and disprove it than you don't make it and something happens to the child. That's where we are with this legislation. The child is the center of this. This here encourages representation by the child. Let the child have a say in what they want to do. The child can say, I want to go with mommy. The child can say, I want to go with daddy. The child can actually say, I want to go with 92 with them. I want to go with granny. The interests of the child are because children know what's in their best interest, you know. The interests of the child are factored. Actually, they're not factored. They're paramount. They are the central tenet of this legislation. The interests of the child should be protected. Sir, if we even move past that, if the child can represent himself, the state will provide an attorney or assistance for the child. Whatever is needed to protect these children and investigate any abuses against them or any danger or any care that they may need will be provided for by the state. As I said, sir, who are the persons who are contemplated to be considered by this legislation, sir? It is children in need of care of attention, children who are being neglected. And it starts, the criteria number one is a child who has no parents. That's the first one, that's the first category, and it goes from there. So, when people talk about the state making decisions for the child, and the state replacing the rights of the parent, the state is not looking to replace the rights of the parent. But when the child ain't got no parents, then what? Or when the child has parents who are not stepping forward, then what? Somebody has to decide. With all the infrastructure we've put in play here, with all the considerations by this piece of legislation, where the best interests of the child are the goal. And sir, if we can't trust the organs of the state to do that, then I don't know who we could trust. Everything is being put in place, sir, to make sure the child gets the best chance. So, I don't mind people who have their questions. When you have your questions, ask your questions. If you ask your questions, we can answer your questions. But don't just simply hold on to what other people say, other people who may have an agenda to not see this come true, who may have an agenda to oppose everything that this government is doing. Everybody who can possibly be consulted on this piece of legislation and on the child justice legislation was consulted. Everyone who wanted to, who had an axe to grind, who had an intervention to make, it had the opportunity. It was advertised over and over. It had a deadline. The deadline was extended to facilitate people. Every single person, interest group in Barbados who wanted to say something on this had a chance. Send it in writing. We can't ignore it. And every single submission was considered. If you read the report, every single one was considered. Every issue raised was ventilated and addressed. And then for some people, sir, we thought, you know what? We want to hear you in person. Not we, I wasn't there. That they want to hear you in person. They called those persons in. And this was not a case of shying from the persons who had the loudest voices. Some of the people who had the loudest voices and the most to say were the persons who were invited in to give oral submissions. There was no shying away from anybody. It was embracing. The louder you are, the more you came forward. We want to hear you. Because when we finish, we want to ensure that everything that could have been addressed was addressed before we pass this. Because when it's done, we want it to be the most comprehensive piece of child protection legislation in the world. Sir, I'm going to wrap up now. But sir, we also took great pains to look at expanding and enhancing the rights of the parents as well. It is child protection legislation, but sir, a child is best protected in a family in which that child knows love and care. A child is best protected by parents who are given the resources to be able to care for their child. Because nobody will ever love you like a mother or a father who actually loves you. Nobody. We know, sir, we have seen persons do the most heinous of crimes. And the mother swearing blind, he was a good boy. He was a good boy, right? All he needed was a chance. This legislation, sir, seeks to secure the family unit. It seeks to provide assistance for the parents. It encourages, even where there's an issue between parent and child, it tries to foster a reconnection of that family unit, sir. And it's, as the minister said, it is the least intrusive way to deal with it. And we try at all costs to preserve the family unit, but with a caveat. That family unit is not going to be preserved at the expense of the child. So some people don't have the tools naturally to actually deal with children. Some people may be in financial difficulty. Their frustrations may have them in a position. The aim is to provide the support for them that allows them back on a level playing field to take care of their child. So for all who say we're looking to usurp the rights of a parent, no. The state don't want to take more and more and more children on its wing. We would take you to protect you. But as soon as we can, we want to provide you with tools to deal with your parents and your parents with tools to deal with you and put you back in your family unit, because that's the best way to nurture and for you to grow. So, sir, the last thing I'm going to say is we accept, as well as the government, sir, that we need a comprehensive PR campaign for this, because we are satisfied now that we have the legislation, the best piece of legislation we can have in the circumstances. But equally, people need to know what it is. It has to be given to them in forms that they can digest. It has to be given to them in ways that they can pick out the sections that they actually want to utilize, right? And be able to understand it and use it properly. So our ministry, sir, through the government, through JS, Public Affairs, and the other organs of the ministry, over the next 6 months, we'll be working very closely with the Honourable Member for St. Michael South and his ministry to put out the information in bite-sized pieces, to put out infomercials, to let people know what the rights of the child are, let people know what the rights of the parents are, let people know how to engage the process, let people know what's mandatory reporting, let people know how to do it anonymously. All of the FAQs, we're going to develop a list of FAQs and we're going to circulate those so that at the end of it, we're given an initial time frame of 6 months. But at the end of that, we want Barbadians to feel comfortable with the new paradigm. We want people to feel comfortable with the new framework, right? And we want everybody to understand how do we access and utilize this legislation in the best interests of children. I had a conversation with the Attorney General, sir, at lunch, and all I'm going to say in relation to what was raised by the Honourable Member for Christchurch South in relation to the sexual offences legislation and the section that was revoked, sir, is that the amended legislation has been drafted and is now with the Law Reform Committee. So he kept alluding to, in case it has been, he fully well knows it was drafted, sir. So the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, chaired by the Chief Justice, sir. And he fully well knows that this is in train. Right, fully well knows that this is in train. So I'm comfortable that in short order, in the shortest possible order, sir, we're going to debate that and clear up all those misunderstandings. Last thing, no, sir. I will not say he's a vagabond. I will not say that. Not from here. Sir, I just want to close off by saying we've turned a corner in Barbados. The parliamentary and legislative landscape is different than it has ever been. This is the first significant piece of legislation, groundbreaking, earth-shattering, paradigm-changing piece of legislation to come through the full consultative process. This is a new era in the politics in Barbados and governance and government in Barbados. This is what it looks like when we all as a country and we all as stakeholders and we all as interest groups come together to work towards a common goal to provide the best possible piece of legislation. Not just the 30 people in here, not just the CPC, but the wider Barbados, everybody concerned in this process, being able to consult to have the most solid piece of legislation that we can possibly have. I want to commend the Honourable Member, sir, for St. George North for steering this committee and her entire committee. The names of the committee were called out before, but this was no easy task. It was a lot of backbreaking work. The report is actually 800 and something pages long, right? It was, I would say that was a labor of love in the pursuit of what is best for the children in Barbados. So for being part of the transformative process, for being part of history with this first piece of legislation, for doing your job that allowed us to do our job, I wish through you, sir, to commend the Honourable Member for St. George North and her team for changing the landscape of Barbados and for doing an excellent job in the protection of our children. Sir, I have spoken thus much to show my complete support and to hope that my explanation has cleared up a number of the misconceptions and helps the people of Barbados to understand that what we have here is the best, most modern, and most comprehensive child protection legislation in the world. I support this legislation, sir.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and permit me to start exactly where the last speaker ended, and that is in expressing sincere appreciation to the Joint Select Committee on the Social Sector and the Environment, whose work is the report of which is the subject of discussion here this afternoon and throughout the course of the day. This work, as was mentioned, is one that was very intense, although the committee, just like the government generally, perhaps made it look a lot easier and a lot more manageable than it could have been. And that's evidence, Mr. Speaker, of what is possible when we really apply our hearts and our wisdom to good outcomes. The committee scheduled and held 9 meetings. And during those meetings, as you heard from previous speakers, we entertained the submissions, written and oral, of a number of speakers. Mr. Speaker, the first thing that was very interesting to the committee was that we only had 13 submissions in total. Certainly we expected that this committee would have been in a lot more meetings. Not that the meetings weren't intense, but we expected that the committee would have been in a lot more meetings, because when you listen to the radio and when you follow the marches and when you hear everybody weighing in and when you read the comments on social media, everything surrounding this piece of legislation, it was like, my gosh, the whole of Barbados can be coming in to have engagement with us. But although we had that expectation, the committee, for the avoidance of doubt in anyone's mind that the committee was interested in shying away from engaging the public on the subject, no matter how many submissions were made, the committee made it a point to write to 28 different institutions, which we felt, even if they didn't consider it necessary, that we considered it necessary that they should come and seize the opportunity to engage with us so that some of the concerns can be addressed. So we wrote to religious organizations, of course, key departments of government, the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, and other associations and trade unions. We even wrote to the Democratic Labour Party. And what was interesting about the Democratic Labour Party, just as it crosses my mind, is that they accepted the invitation. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, if we had followed the rules as the committee established under the terms and reference for the committee in its entirety, perhaps we would have made ground for a different kind of intervention from the leader of the opposition here today. Because it would have been, oh, you didn't allow us to come, whoever us is. You didn't allow us to come, you didn't allow us to present, and so on. But that committee was not, that institution was not only late on the deadline by 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, but by over a week. And the committee, the Joint Select Committee, determined we'll wait, we'll continue our work and go through the submissions that we had before us, but we will leave room. Because sometimes when you are interested in promoting and protecting democracy, one has sometimes to cut a blind eye to the things that one can reasonably hold fast to. And I'm very, very glad, Mr. Speaker, to be in a moment where the value of the committee's decision-making in that particular regard has borne good fruit. Because notwithstanding all of the contention within that institution and all the pulling and throwing, we're glad that support was given by the now leader of the opposition, who supported the positions of the representatives of another faction or of the party that came before the committee some 6 months ago. So that's a good sign, because he is approving the submission and more so approving the input into the conclusions before us in the report here today. I can't get past my introduction without giving a special appreciation to the Chief Parliamentary Counsel acting, and Attorney General and Honourable Member for St. Joseph. I am sure you'll be aligned, your view would be aligned to mine, in saying that we must hasten all efforts, ensuring that the Hollywood within that particular, the Hollywood within that particular area is contained. Because, Mr. Speaker, you see Chief Parliamentary Counsel acting, and really the efforts of Ms. Sean Bell and the contribution to this committee. Mr. Speaker, sir, she approached it with such calm and patience, even and professionalism, utmost of professionalism, explaining even to the members of the committee certain aspects that would be critical to us in undertaking our work from the very onset of the committee's work. So I am also making a plug for the need for additional resources, because with the many pieces of legislation that are going before CPC, it is necessary. I know groundwork has been laid and there's a paper and whatever processes we have to go through, but I'm asking that we would hasten and not hasten slowly. So I go straight into the purpose. And the purpose of the legislation, the bill before us, it was quite comprehensively put by the Honourable Member for St. Michael South as he embarked on providing the context within which the report must be reviewed and received earlier today in his submission, and by other speakers. But there is a saying that repetition is the mother of learning and perhaps the father of retention. And among the objectives that were given, and I read them: to make provision for children in need of care and protection, to promote the safety and welfare of the child, to protect the child from abuse and neglect, to ensure the best interests of children in need of care and protection. Mr. Speaker, during the course of our work, this purpose came under a fair amount of discussion. And it wasn't because anybody had a problem with those 4 objects as stated under the purpose, but I'll explain why it came into the mix. Because there is another element of the purpose that speaks to ensuring compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other international instruments to which Barbados is a party. So we've heard other speakers make the point that although Barbados may be party to these international instruments, it does not stop Barbados as any other sovereign nation from issuing reservations and from creating distance between what it puts into law if there is a fundamental breach of what we stand for. But in any event, amendments to treaties cannot undermine the intention of the treaties anyhow. But all that aside, there was a big debate around Barbados in its sovereignty, putting into legislation that we want to ensure compliance with something that we had already ratified since 1990, not the 1990s, since 1990. And so, Mr. Speaker, as trivial as it would sound, and as obvious as it may seem to some, I just want to have us understand how serious the committee was in ensuring that everybody can find some zone of common agreement. There is an understanding when you write definitions and you include bullets, bullet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you come to the penultimate bullet and the last bullet and there's an and, it means that all of these things must be taken together. But although the legislation in its original draft would have made that, included that and, meaning that all of those things would be taken together, the committee recognized the sensitivity of some that wanted to ensure that if this bill was truly about the care and protection of children, that we have that up front and we put the compliance to treaties and so on at the bottom, and that is the recommendation that the committee made. Because there were some people that if they didn't see it on bullet 1 or 2, they felt that the and didn't make a difference. So that's the first thing we addressed. Then another key bone of contention taking the submissions together was on the issue that we heard previously mentioned on sexual orientation. Now, there are some people, if they want to make their point, they will create things even where they do not remotely exist. And in the committee, we spent considerable time, especially when dealing with the oral submissions, because the committee had made its determination on the written submissions. But in reviewing and going through the oral submissions, we had the opportunity for the exchanges to take place and for the public to see those exchanges taking place. And they're still up that the public can go back and review those exchanges so that they don't have to take our word for it. And it was established very clearly that the bill had nothing to do with that. And Mr. Speaker, what was very interesting was that in one of the oral submissions, when once we can only believe that the proponents of the submission recognized that it really did not have anything, or maybe accepted, or at the very least agreed that they can disagree with us without being disagreeable. They then suggested that we should expand the object of the bill to address sexual orientation, so that this precise comment was that the government and the agencies of government should be urged to reconceptualize the purpose of the bill and revised language so that the provisions of the bill are consistent with an informed, well-reasoned national stance on sexual orientation. Now, if you go through the process that we went through towards getting the bill to the point it was at before committee, and we went then towards reconceptualizing, Mr. Speaker, you could imagine that we wouldn't be here now, but how far from where we are to get to this point we would need to go, as we would need to go back to the drawing board and include objectives for something that really is not necessary, because the purpose of the bill is not to address all children, but to identify and address the needs of those children who are in need of care and protection. This will be changing the scope completely. So while the committee accepted that the conversation is a useful one to have, and perhaps is one that should be had at the appropriate time, here was not the appropriate place for that, and that's something that we stand by. The other issue that preoccupied a lot of time had to do, Mr. Speaker, with the preoccupation of too many, and I wouldn't say that they read the bill or not, but too many that the bill, if it was passed, would lead to the removal of parental rights. Mr. Speaker, I want to maybe pull together a lot of what was mentioned by other speakers, including the minister who led the bill this morning. Clause 3. If we start at clause 3, which deals with the purpose, it addressed the concern and should have removed the concern of any who believed that the major concern had to do with the removal of parental rights. Because among other things, at clause 3, it contemplates that in determining the best interests of the child, that attention must be given to the capacity of the parent to properly discharge parental responsibility. That is not saying that we just go about the country and determining that we are the big bad Ministry of People Empowerment and we want to take people's children from them. If there's a problem that has been raised, before any decision is taken, the professionals who have responsibility to determine in those situations must give consideration to the capacity of a parent, not just to discharge, but to properly discharge parental responsibility. It also, at clause 3, provision is made for the views of the child, not the views of all children where complaints are issued, the views of a child where appropriate. Because there are some children that will be able to articulate, and there are some others whose views you may not be able to obtain because they might not be old enough, they may not be developed enough mentally and so on. But the bill contemplates that where children can express their views, the opportunity can and should be provided as appropriate for children to be able to express their views. The bill also promotes that the least intrusive intervention in the life of the child and his family shall be taken. So you don't just go and a social worker sits down and determines that the first thing that comes to their mind, take the child and send it here or whatever. You sit down and you not only consider what is in the best interest of the child, but the child and his family. The implications of the family institution have to be foremost. But the bill goes further in clause 4, where it seeks to ensure that where the child has to be taken from the home of the parent, whether permanently or temporarily, that provision is still made for engagement between the child and that home where the best interest of the child is not compromised. So it recognizes that, look, we may have to end up, having considered all other options, we may still have to end up removing this child from the home. But we do not want to destroy the institution of family, or we don't want to destroy for that child all that he has known. Because even when you're doing something in the interest of a child, there are feelings of that disconnection that can cause disruption to the child as well. So the bill makes provision for that child being able to retain relationships where they will not compromise their best interests with significant people, including parents and siblings. And sir, the bill goes further. It makes provision for the existing circumstances of the family to be considered, as we heard the former speaker speak about not only the conflict resolution and arranging assistance to resolve conflict without recourse to legal proceedings, because some people treated this bill as if, oh, you're going to be hauling parents before the courts. When the foremost intention is to see how can we fix this without having to go the legal route. Because we know, and there are a number of attorneys in this room, but having to go the legal route sometimes complicates things. It's better if you can find a mechanism to deal with issues that doesn't have to be what you have to do by law, but what people commit to doing by agreement. And so the appropriateness, therefore, of finding those conflict resolution solutions without legal proceedings is paramount. At clause 29, it provides for the arrangement of support services, which may include even financial support, as we've heard. Because sometimes the best interest of a child is not taken care of because parents don't want to, but it is simply because they can't. And all of us, I'm sure I can speak for all of us in here as members of Parliament, who confront that on a daily basis, with people coming to us and saying, I have my child to feed, I have my child to send school, I have this emergency, I can't, I need your help. They do not want to get rid of their children. It is not in the best interest of their children to remove them from that home, but you have to allow a hand up. And on this note, it will be remiss of me not to encourage citizens of Barbados who know of these cases and who can assist to get on board in doing that. I know we have the One Family and so on, but even if you don't register in that program, people live around us, and we know that people need that helping hand. Please don't leave it to government to do all, because the list of what government has to deal with is one that is tremendous. And while that waiting line is there for your turn to come, there is so much that can go wrong for families and children. Children who we establish are amongst the most vulnerable in our society. All of these provisions in the bill, Mr. Speaker, are aimed at ensuring that breaking up families is a last resort where the best interest of the child is concerned. Mr. Speaker, there's also the provision for taking no action. Because a complaint has been laid, it does not mean automatically that a parent is made to be guilty in circumstances where an investigation shows that there's nothing to worry about. But of course, if there's no action required, as happens now, the suitable reports are made. And finally, I want to refer to Clause 54, where the staff of the approved child care order and the director shall assist the child with reuniting the child with his parents where the best interest of the child is not compromised. So you don't, if you have to take a child, you don't go and take a child and leave it at that, but all efforts are put in train to ensure that the family as an institution is not undermined and that the family can be reunited as was the intention of the Almighty, not the law, but the God-given right for families to be together. Mr. Speaker, I sought to just extrapolate those areas that fell under the committee's purview and consideration that when we looked at all of the submissions were among the most pressing. Others, and I didn't go into the mandatory reporting because it was very comprehensively covered by the speaker immediately before me. But I sought to just give highlights of, after all the shouting and whatever, what the summary of what the main concerns were that were addressed before the committee. And as I approach my conclusion, I will want to end where the Honourable Member for St. Michael South began, reminding us that this legislation, the bill before this House, does not in every respect break new ground on existing legislation, but what it does is amplifies the existing legislation by prioritizing the safety of children and ensuring the best interests of the child, by ensuring that children are best looked after by their families first and foremost, unless the best interest of the child is compromised, by allowing families to look after them, so that early intervention is also a mandate of the child protection services as well, by ensuring that children now have a clear opportunity to participate in the process where it is appropriate, by enhancing and protecting parental rights. That's the irony, that instead of removing the parental rights, the bill actually does the reverse by all that I hope I've shown you, to protect parental rights and enhance them, and provide the children with access to legal advice at the expense of the state. And that was the submission by the Bar Association. They were very clear on that children may need representation, and children, because they're minors, will not have representation unless the state intervenes. And so the legislation on legal aid was expanded as a result of our work in committee to ensure that children can have access to legal advice and support at the expense of the state. And of course, some will say I'm wearing a workers' representative hat again, but the bill amplifies the protection of the Director of Child Protection and the representatives of the Child Protection Authority, ensuring, among other things, their pension and all their rights and so on, but clarifying in many instances for them, under the law, what to do if there are concerns or where there are concerns about the safety of a child and the course that they should follow. So, Mr. Speaker, in entering, I can't speak for other members of the committee, but in entering the start of our meetings, there were many things that were anticipated. And one of the things that I did as chair was to ensure that I kept a very open mind, and perhaps too is my training, because even if you hold a view, you work and operate in a system where you appreciate that all ideas must contain. And all ideas must contain cannot just be something that you say, but it has to be something that full expression is given to. I would not end before I express my gratitude to a member of the committee who, by no fault of his own, started the journey with us but couldn't end it. And that is Dr. Charleston Brathwaite, who served as independent senator until sometime in February, when the crossing of the floor meant that, as he put it in his own words, one day I had a job and the next day was out of a job. But I'm sure he didn't see it as a job, but he has also expressed that it was his pleasure to serve. I recall very well that before one of our meetings, we were having a discussion which he contextualized very interestingly around the second law of thermodynamics. Because one day we were having a conversation around physics, and he was very sure to point to me that all things relate to physics. Physics will offer explanations for a lot of things that go on in our society. And the second law of thermodynamics states that the level of disorder in a society will steadily increase. And I'm sure that if we look around us, we see how the level of disorder in society, you are an attorney, Mrs. Speaker, and I'm sure that things you have to encounter now demonstrate that very fact that is borne out in physics. It also recognizes that we are moving from ordered behavior to disorder, where people seem to be more interested in the emotion and the excitement of disorder and disruption than they are concerned with the productivity and the constructive outcomes of order. And I raised that point, sir, because as I was sitting, listening particularly to the Honourable Member for St. Peter, and as he was responding to a number of the assertions and points raised, I won't use adjectives to qualify them, by the member for Christchurch South, it occurred to me that we have to guard very carefully our democracy. Because if we don't, there's a tendency, as the speaker, the member for St. Peter raised, for our democracy that has served Barbados, its 166 square miles, so well for the years, particularly post-independence. It is very possible as disorder increases for us to see our democracy transforming into anarchy. And we don't even want to get into tyranny. But we must guard our democracy very sacredly. There are Barbadians who are promoting disorder. It's a sad day for all of us when, in the name of democracy and expressing their view, that disorder becomes the order of the day, and it finds its way even into this house, where eloquence is confused for information that has validity. Yes. There are those whose very interest and whose very object is clear to create disorder. They typify disorder even by the institutions that they lead. And they wish us to accept that disorder in the name of pursuing democracy. We see them for who they are, but our concern has to be with those who won't see them for what they are. Those who are not as aware, not as alert, perhaps because they're not as interested as well in what is going on around them, because they find it easier to make contact with secondary information. So I appreciate honorable members who say, go to the Parliament website. But everybody is not going to go. Everybody can't get appreciation for what the bill says by reading it. So I say to my colleagues, if we are to prevent the disorder or to contain the rate at which order is becoming disorder, it will require a sustained energy from all of us. It means that even if it seems like we said it before, even if it means that we explained it before, we need energy and we need commitment to making sure that we keep reminding people what is and what is at stake. We can filter between the noises too of those who seem to be interested in disorder and anarchy, because there's not everything that they say that might not have some value, and we have to be able to filter, not agree with the basis for why they're doing it, but see how we can do better to deliver to the people of Barbados. I know that my time is up, but I remember, Mr. Speaker, being part of a protest in 2017 when there was one who stood up and said, the body of mind them, they're only looking to burn calories and so on, and trivializing the effort. And then I lived a year later to hearing some who sat on the benches with that member who was honorable before he became dishonorable. And they said, oh, look how that group of people bring down a government. If we are not mindful, we don't have to agree, but we still have to hear. Seeing people, feeling people means all people. And we still have to hear what is being said that has value to us, protecting our democracy and doing better by our democracy. For in order for us to preserve and uphold our democracy, as I said before, it requires energy and tremendous effort. So let us continue to encourage our citizens out there to promote our democracy through their vote, through political debates, through brass stats, through marches and protests, crossing the floor, whatever, causing confusion. That is not promoting our democracy. It may be a result of some of the things that I spoke about. But let us encourage our citizens. I want to personally encourage our citizens to use the opportunity provided through these standing committees that have been established. There have been joint select committees before that were chosen on an ad hoc basis to address things, the last of which we had was on vending before this one. But we have institutionalized now in our parliament an avenue for all citizens to weigh in on issues, not because they are controversial and not because people keep enough noise so we can rush and carry them before a committee, but because too there are some issues that require a number of lifestyle changes and fundamental shifts in our behaviors if the legislation is to have applicability and do what it's supposed to do. So let us encourage, and my special appeal is to all citizens of Barbados, when bills come before Joint Select Committee and you have strong views, see this as your time. And when, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy, as I was back in May last year, to commend the Child Protection Bill, but now in its amended form, having gone through the very intense and extensive discussions over 9 meetings. To this honorable chamber and to the people in Barbados, I regard it as being very fundamental in shaping, redefining, and strengthening democracy for our children, their future, and the future of their children as well. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this chamber stands suspended for 10 minutes.
Question is that this honorable chairman be suspended for 10 minutes. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended for 10 minutes.